Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Ragdale's Creative POV Artist Talk. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time this morning to join this conversation between our Ragdale alumni artists, Deke Weaver and Margaret Hawkins. My name is Regina Gloria, and I'm the Director of Education here at Ragdale. And we are very pleased to host this program, especially while we remain closed to the artists in residence due to COVID-19. These online programs are actually giving our Ragdale In School Fellows the opportunity to share their work with a broader community, which of course they would typically do in person at the schools. So thank you for taking part in it and joining our virtual classroom. You may have seen that our listing of upcoming Creative POV artists talk this month features a whole slew of various disciplines. They'll be happening every Friday throughout the summer season, with the exception of the 4th of July weekend. And we'll be recording all of the POV talks. So captions will be provided for the final edited version, and that'll be available on our website for viewing again much later. And of course, everything will be free and available to everyone. So before I begin, there's a few notes. If you have questions, we do have time at the end to cover them. So please feel free to go to the chat box and write them down throughout the presentation. And then we'll get to them at the very end. Thank you. So I just wanted to start by saying that, this being involved with Ragdale is really quite special for all of us here on the staff. We get to meet and work with a whole slew of high caliber artists who spend weeks working on projects. And we actually get to see them unfold on some level. They're not just remarkably talented individuals. I feel like they're also genuinely good people who have so much to contribute to the world. And I see them as essential workers for sure. Deke Weaver is certainly no exception. He's an award-winning writer, performer, new media artist, designer, and director of unusual events. His interdisciplinary work and performances and videos have been presented all over the world: Australia, Brazil, Canada, Europe, Russia, and of course here in the US. He's a Guggenheim Fellow and a Creative Capital Awardee, amongst many other awards, and has an endless list of residencies. And even with all that, he has time to teach as an associate professor at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where he serves on the faculty in the Department of Theater and the School of Art and Design's New Media program. Deke is working on a lifelong project called the Unreliable Bestiary, which is a performance for each letter of the alphabet, each letter represented by an endangered animal or habitat. And to this date, he's presented monkey, elephant, wolf, and bear. And last fall of 2019, he presented tiger, which is the 5th production. And of course, you'll be hearing more about the progress of this project in a minute. And he'll be in conversation with Margaret Hawkins, of course, who is the author of 3 novels: Lydia's Party, A Year of Cats and Dogs, and How to Survive a Natural Disaster, and a memoir about her sister, After Schizophrenia, the story of my sister's reawakening. She writes about art for VAS and is currently a senior lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And she's taught at Ragdale's high school art intensive for well over 12 years. She was actually our first teaching artist in that program, and will be leading several interviews throughout the summer for the Creative POV series. I actually met Margaret many years ago when the Ragdale 30th anniversary show came up, and she curated and put that together. And it's always a pleasure to work with you, Margaret. So thank you both, Deke and Margaret, for being here. Margaret, I'm going to turn it over to you to take over. Yep.
Welcome everyone for coming to listen to this fascinating artist talk about his work. Deke, I'm going to begin with kind of an omnibus question with 2 parts. So you have said of your lifelong project, the Unreliable Bestiary, that it uses, and I'm quoting you here, humor, poetics, and wonder to inspire people to live differently. You've also said that wild animals are canaries in the coal mine. Can you please begin by telling us, A, what an unreliable bestiary is, and B, how it can affect our lives?
Unreliable bestiary, yeah. I guess it's the phrase is just kind of like combining two different ideas. So the idea of the unreliable narrator, where in a film, a play, a novel, you are following a character, it's going along, and you think you know how the world is working, and at the very end, you realize that this character is, you know, evil or, you know, something. It just really, you're viewing as a audience member, you suddenly realize that everything you've been believing is flipped on its head, and it kind of does this, for me anyway, it does this sort of like leafing through all these different note cards that you've been taking about the narrative, and just kind of like realizing that it's totally wrong. You have to think about your whole experience with the story in a different way. Um, so, and then the bestiary is kind of based on a medieval idea where every animal, plant, mineral, hill, ocean had a sacred purpose. And so the idea of the unreliable narrator is, for me anyway, ends up becoming this thing about thinking humans have this idea where they know where nature is going to go. We have this sort of cocky idea that we are in control, and but we really don't. And I think our current moment is a really nice example of that. Um, so the combination of the two, of just the unreliable, just this unreliable sense of the natural world, and kind of a coming at it from a humble perspective, where it's a much bigger place than we might like to think it is.
Can you
Yeah.
talk about how, you talked about the present time and what you're doing? I know you've talked about the catastrophic effects of our loss of biodiversity. Can you talk about how those subjects how you deal with those subjects in your work, and how you intend to inspire us?
Well, I think most of the project ends up becoming this idea. On the surface, there's this idea that it's and it's about these particular animals, but it really ends up becoming about our the human animal connection. You know, the stories that become out of that surface, that interface between the human and the animals. Um, so I think the stories coming out of it is, well, coming out of it, going out and finding it. There's a lot of research that goes on with these different shows, and going out and talking to people that are working with the animals or studying them out there in the field every day. And or maybe they're people that are living, being pushed out to the edge of where they used to be, farmers, and where or people that are right up against the forest that's getting whittled away and whittled away, and all of a sudden maybe you were living as subsistence of living off a forest, but if the forest is gone, you have to find other ways of eating. And so working with these stories, finding these stories, I think what I hope that they do is they start making you, letting you realize as an audience member that there's an awful lot of interconnections that we take for granted, or we don't think about that often, and really trying to find ways of illuminating those connections through storytelling and through these experiences that are well, they're not all that common in Champaign, Illinois. Maybe they're a little bit more common in bigger theater towns. But I guess it's just trying to connect this to people personally. So if you're living in a suburb, you're living in a rural suburb sort of place like Urbana-Champaign, like why does that matter about how would elephants have anything to do with you at all? And so trying to find stories where you can see that, like, no, there are reasons to think about this. And also just the idea that the whole world is connected in a very so many ways. Just the idea of one bat or one pangolin coming out of the forest and going into a Wuhan wet market, and then just bing, 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 bing. We've got this global pandemic, and so that's a pretty obvious series of connections. But there's others that you just start digging, and but I guess it's trying to do it in a way that's not preachy, that's not finger wagging. Sometimes it's using humor. A lot of times it's using humor. And just images, and yeah.
You've talked a lot about, or you use the word story and storytelling a lot in your description. And I've seen a couple of your videos now, and they are these extraordinary interdisciplinary braidings of stories about animals, and many of them about specific animals or specific experiences around animals. There's one now. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how you use particular stories in talking about a specific species of animal.
Well, I think the with doing the research for these things, the way I've been doing them well so far is doing a lot of reading, doing travel if it's possible, and going to places where these animals live and where the people are living with them. For instance, I think one of the tools that keeps getting used in these different performances is the sort of black humor about, like, how we haven't had bears in Illinois for over 120 years. So making a joke about bears living in suburbia or in the very small parks that we have in East Central Illinois, those jokes aren't really going to work in Montana, where you really are dealing with, you have to be really careful when you go outside at night in certain parts of Montana, certain parts of northwestern Wyoming, because grizzlies are there, and so it's not necessarily that irony isn't it's not there. So I guess it's collecting these different stories and collecting interviews, collecting. I shoot a lot of video when I go to these places. I shoot film, shoot stills, and readings, interviews, experience, and trying to keep the collection open, collecting these things for as long as possible, without making any judgment.
Yeah.
Sorry, you gonna say?
No, I was just agreeing. I can really see that in your work. There's an openness to these multiple perspectives.
Yeah. Right. I'm trying to keep it open to, like, everything that have anything to do with like, if I'm saying I'm working on elephant, it's like it's collecting all the myths about elephants, all the Looney Tunes thing where an elephant shows up, or branding for commercials for different products and things. So how the idea of an elephant filters through pop culture, and and then going and going and trying to push it as long as I can until I start finding, usually there's this feeling like a spine of a story or the show kind of reveals itself. It's just sort of where it's, you really get the feeling of like, that's it.
Yeah.
And then having that spine, you kind of realize what's going to fit with it and what's not. And sometimes there's, I can see some of these older shows and I'm like, oh, that should be cut. That should be cut. That should be cut, But because, I mean, sometimes it is hard to kill the babies that, because it's like finding those little, you get these particular ideas. They might be a video idea, might be a sculptural idea, might be just an image.
Yeah.
And sometimes it really resonates, and sometimes it's just not going to resonate with that particular spine, so it might end up having to get cut
Of course.
at the end.
Yeah. What's so cool is that you can get all these different mediums working together, that you aren't committed to only making three-dimensional objects or only making film, or you do it, all of it.
Well, I sort of do it. I mean, I do it. I get the ideas, and I do the research and do a lot of writing to a certain point, and then I'm bringing in and talking to core collaborators. And some of these ones, especially Elephant, Wolf, and Bear, we had a lot of people working on them, and a lot of really interesting, smart, sometimes artists, sometimes designers, and sometimes people that might be in adjacent sort of disciplines or something. Different friends who are professors at the university who like putting on these different personas, and so there's a lot of collaborative work for these bigger ones. I mean, I guess this happens everywhere, but definitely in Champaign, the theater performance crew, it's a much smaller pool than it is in Chicago, New York, LA. And so for a while, we definitely had this great bunch of core collaborators. And then things have shifted. People have moved out of town. People's lives have changed. And so those collaborators aren't necessarily as easily brought in. So Tiger was a much smaller sort of thing, where I was kind of going back to my earlier thing of just really, truly solo. Have some, collaborators that worked with me early, like Jane Wenger, my friend who's I've been working with forever. She was my director and dramaturg in San Francisco, and we've continued to work together. A lot of times as dramaturg, but this last one, she was co-directing with me. And other ones, Jen Allen, my wife, we've worked together on all of these except for Tiger. And and so Susan Becker has done the costumes for us for a long time. And this one we had Jacob Ross doing the sound for Tiger, and Melissa Picorni worked on the set design. So that a lot of those, Melissa and Jacob hadn't worked with those folks before. And other times it's working with people that, the great thing about the collaboration is that you end up, especially when you start trusting people, when you kind of can give it up to, like, here's the general idea, and they take it and they run with it and they do things there's no way you could have done because that's not my thing, and right. So they take it to a whole other level that just enriches the piece so much more. So, and the collaborative thing it's interesting. It's really, it's like trying to find a sweet spot where people have a general idea of the world that has been built, like the imaginative narrative world that's being built, and then a general idea of what you want, but then giving them a lot of agency to kind of like connect with it personally. So they're feeling like they've got some skin in the game.
Right. Right. I'm going to change the subject a little bit here
Yeah.
and ask how you got started. I mean, I know you studied biology as an undergraduate, and clearly that background is evident in the work. But I'm wondering how you decided to become an artist rather than, say, a zoologist or a doctor or something.
Yeah. Well, and I've got both of those in my background. Like my mom's dad, my grandpa was he was a gynecologist, and my dad is a natural resources management ornithologist, biologist. So, but I think the zoology thing, because I think I went into undergrad thinking, oh, yeah, that's what I want to do. But I think really quickly it was realizing that the science that I was running into in undergrad it was about formulas and chemistry and lab coats and sitting at a lab bench. And I was way more interested in being outside. And, for me, it was like, I want to be Jacques Cousteau.
Yeah.
And that wasn't happening. And, and maybe it would eventually, but I think where I was going to school is like micro this and micro that and numbers. And I know there's people out there that can see big, wide, amazing, abstract, beautiful things through data. But I don't think that's me. So my second semester there, I took a photo class, and I had no, I don't know. I just thought it was going to be about sunsets and kitties, but it was learning about people like Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, Diane Arbus, and realizing, seeing these images and realizing, oh, there's people out there that are feeling the same things that I am, and finding ways of expressing it that just I didn't know that existed, and it was such an amazing feeling. So I really think it was more about, and I eventually, like in grad school for photography, I realized that I wasn't really that great a photographer, but what I was mostly attracted to was the stories around the
Yeah.
photographs.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it's like connecting with the stories, connecting with emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and through those things kind of opening up into this really big open
Yeah.
world that's not simple, that's complicated and slippery and
Yeah.
shifting. And that felt, and I think that's possible to like be hitting that through something like zoology. But for me, it was a much faster way through art. And I think for me, it was also like I felt like I could make something and feel that with what I was making. And the kind of what I was finding with science was, at least undergraduate science, was that it was that would have been a much longer road, I think, for me to actually get back to that place that I remember from being a little
Right.
kid and being out in the world with my dad. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, that's so clear in the work, the way you put it. What are you working on now? Or if you're in hiatus, what comes next?
Um, well, mostly what I'm working on now is the kind of being part of the frantic struggle of the University of Illinois, trying to figure out what comes up in the fall.
Yeah.
But besides that, one of the things with these big site-specific pieces is there's a lot of effort that goes into these things, and then just mostly because it's not entirely because of budget. It's also because of it's also because there's a lot of people working on it, some of them for a little bit of money and some of them for no money at all.
Yeah.
So asking them to do like a month-long run or 2 months long is just not going to happen. And then on the other hand, like there's a lot of money for like video projectors or something like that goes in, where I'm literally only able to um you know rent the stuff or rent the space for 5 or 6 days. So these have, and I memorized, some of this, like the Wolf Show, I ended up memorizing like 2 hours of material, and we only did it like 5 times.
Wow.
And so um, so anyway, what I really hope to do with these site specific pieces, where each piece we're doing is in a place that reflects the animal story, or the human animal story, and so trying to find ways of translating those, and that are more easily distributable. So I'm trying to make I am making a book of each one. They're small, they're little sort of field guide size. And so at the end of 26 letters, there'd be a small encyclopedia. Also, editing, we try to really shoot these well with video and with still images. And so the video will be shot with multiple cameras over a couple of different nights, and I'll edit them all together to make a document of the piece that really feels, so you get a feeling like you're there. And then the other thing I'll do is, a lot of times we'll try to make a solo version of it that can go to classrooms. I can take it to classrooms or film festivals or small theaters, or so it has a little bit longer life. It's a totally different thing, but it gives some of the same ideas. But what's nice is that there's some ideas that, like in Wolf, for example, we took 2 buses out. We brought people on a bus, put people on a bus, brought them out to a forest, Allerton Park, got there right around sunset. We divided the 2 buses into 4 different groups and took them off into 4 different directions. Each group had a different experience with the wolves that are in the forest, these dancers dressed as wolves. And so there was no way for every group to have the same experience. But with the video, it all gets knitted together, so you can see what happened with each different group a little bit. Or with the book, you might be able to spend a little bit more time with the text, just sinking into the story itself without. So I think each medium has its different positive pluses, but it's also just trying to give it a different life. So I'm working on a couple of the books right now. Thinking a little bit about some of the stuff is also just like, what is performance now? What do we do with, I was just seeing this article about a socially distanced theater piece in Germany. And just imagining what this thing is, because so much of what I really want to do with these things is bring people together and really have them experience something that is, a little different, but a lot of that has to do with being close to each other. And so I'm wondering what that means for what comes next. And without that, thinking about that, also just thinking about kind of like maybe something on a habitat. So maybe prairie, like Illinois is the prairie state. But there's hardly any prairie at all. Or also thinking about tree, working with Rick Power's idea from the Overstory. And yeah.
Deke, I'm going to jump in here. I'm afraid our time is almost out, but I want to ask you one last question, since this is related to Ragdale in the schools. This one's kind of targeted to students and young artists. If you could give one piece of advice to your younger self, your younger artist self, what would it be?
Well, I was thinking about this because you sent it earlier, and I think probably a couple of pieces. So yeah, stay curious, let yourself keep questioning the status quo, and on a business end, don't worry so much about the gatekeepers, and maybe take some bigger risks. I think that's what I would say. Yeah.
I think that's good advice for all of us. Thank you so much, Deke.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks.
Thank you,
And thanks
Ragdale.
to Ragdale. Thanks, Rajan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deke and Margaret. I do want to give some time to you all to reply to some of these questions. I know Maggie had a couple of questions about seeing some video, and I just want to reassure everybody that I will share some links. There's actually there's several links available online, both on Deke's website, as well as, if you just Google him, that there's sort of endless video footage, including on unreliablebestiary.org. Is that correct, Deke?
Yeah, that's correct. And there's like my Vimeo page has got a lot of because I think what I sent you was those are sort of shorter ones, but some of the longer work sample things, like 10 minutes or whatever. Right now, both Elephant and Wolf are there. They're big, long things, but they're not going to be there for that long. Yeah.
They're worth it. Watch.
Great. And then there's also another question from Amy about, and this is actually something I thought of from the very beginning, but how do you decide to choose which specific animal to feature?
Well, the first chunk was sort of what it's not even really biologists that will call this. It's more like fundraisers for Sierra Club or something. Well, they've used the term charismatic megafauna. So the big animals that you'd see in the zoos or that are in our cartoons, generally they think that they just wonder about, like, they think that people connect with them more deeply because they show behavior that are sort of like us. So there's family involved. They do things that feel kind of like something we recognize personally. And so starting with monkey, then did elephant, wolf, bear, tiger. So the next one I think is probably going to be a habitat, because I've been thinking of this as like not just endangered species, I mean endangered animals, but also endangered habitats. So and it's all, some of it's also like, well, like I've got this fantastic, university job, and part of it is being able to, doing this work is what, it's my research. So I'm able to make these ideas, and then like, where would I like to spend some time? And so I would love to figure out a way to do something about like whales or, orcas or something like that, because God, I would love to connect with the people that are working with them, being out on the ocean, so I don't really have anything laid out. And I am definitely wondering about getting older. And, I don't really know if I'm going to be able to, how much I'm going to be able to get done of the 26 letters being about the, yeah, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, interestingly enough, Jorge had a question about that exact thing. He says not to hurry you, but what happens if you don't have time to do every letter of the alphabet? Yes, well, faith, by the way, that you'll live past 100 years.
Well, if this is the Jorge that I think it is, I'm going to give it all to him. Well, I mean, this is one of the things I'm thinking. I was just out. One of the people that has worked on this was a grad student of ours that she teaches now out at Whitman College in Washington. And she brought me out there with the idea of doing a project with the students, and we were thinking about doing salmon. And so this is something I'm thinking about, of like trying to figure out how to make, maybe not make it curriculum, but make it something that becomes more of where groups can do it, or students can do it, or where I become more consultant director or something. Or maybe there's something, maybe there's something that becomes a web-based sort of thing, where you put this out to classes around the country of like, make 5-minute videos about this or that, and then it becomes more about different ideas of continuing the project, but sort of crowdsourcing it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's really fantastic. This idea of a lifelong project is really fascinating to me. And I hope you don't mind me asking my own sort of personal question, but you talked a little bit about this sort of danger and irony of these animals, in different contextual spaces. Montana versus Chicago, for instance. And I'm
Sure.
curious to know how everything that's happening today, from the pandemic to all of the really big issue protests and such, is going to affect how you ultimately execute these projects. What is the personification that might kind of fall into place on these animals that are based off of what's happening right now, if any?
Yeah, well, personification of the animals becomes like with a lot of biologists, that's kind of tricky anyway. They like the whole idea of um, I'm drawing a blank on the word, but anthropomorphizing, becomes dicey. I personally think if you're using it the right way, it can actually be a really nice doorway into different kinds of thinking, of empathic sort of thinking. And I think with the pandemic and the protests, it's interesting trying to figure out ways of being able to articulate the project in a particular way that isn't going to pigeonhole it. Because I run into this all the time where people think, oh, it's about animals, and it's in a way that's and it's probably just because the bestiary has a kind of relation to like a kid's ABCD book, and so I think there's the impulse to pigeonhole it as childlike for kids. I get that question all the time. Can I bring my kids? It's like, well, it depends on you and it depends on the kid, because it's like the animal world is filled with violence and sex, and I'm going to talk about both. So so trying to figure out ways of describing the interconnectedness, the system-based sort of thinking of the whole project, I think is a challenge for me, just to be able to put that out there early on, so if people haven't seen a full piece, because I think there's a lot of things that can come up in your mind really quickly without sitting through a whole piece. So we'll see. It's definitely a challenge for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Margaret, do you have anything else to ask?
I have a million things. I don't think I have anything that fits in in our small time. No, I take it back. I do. Deke, what's one thing you do every day as an artist? I don't mean like stuff like eating breakfast, but the artist thing that you do every day.
Well, I guess the thing that I actually do every day is read, and it is connected with breakfast. So I make this amazing bowl of this cereal and coffee, and then I read for an hour or two, and that's the most consistent thing that I do. Yeah, for sure.
You told me in our phone conversation that you read a lot more fiction than you read nonfiction. And as a fiction writer, of course, I loved hearing that. But I also think it's fascinating. Can you explain why a little bit?
Well, I think one of the things I really like about making these performances is, I've got my own heroes of performance people. Like when I was first introduced to Laurie Anderson or Spalding Gray, and then later on the radio artist Joe Frank. I have a similar feeling with particular novels or short stories where there's a rhythm to the voice, and with that rhythm, there's this sort of I love what's possible with it. It's kind of it can be kind of hypnotic. It can be it just feels the possibility of putting you in a different mindset, into a different way of seeing the world through that hypnosis, I think it can be really powerful. And I like going into those worlds that fiction can build. But I definitely have favorites, and it's always there's some books that like I could never get the rhythm of Hilary Mantel's like Wolf Hall. Never. I just like I'd have to look at the page like 4, 5, 6 times before I would like finally give up and just move on to the next page, because I couldn't hit her rhythm. And then there's other artists that are like the rhythm is just like all of a sudden I'm done with the book. I don't even know where I was, and that I like that feeling a lot.
Recommend a book.
Oh, okay. Well, recently just got done with the Neapolitan Quartet, the Elena Ferrante.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's that, and then yeah, Roberto Bolaño's 2666, which was kind of the anti Elena Ferrante. This was amazing. Yeah. Yeah.
We'll make sure to add those to our additional resources.
There you go. Yeah.
So I think we are out of time. So thank you, Deke and Margaret, for your time and expertise. And thank you to everyone else for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed this very first Creative POV Artist Talk. And as a reminder, this has been recorded and will be available for viewing on Ragdale's website and our YouTube channel very soon. Along with this, especially for teachers and students, you should know that we are creating these supplemental teacher's guides in a PDF format. And that will also be available on our website, which will be coming out soon, the revamped version of our new website. So you can delve further into Deke's work. There'll be links, images, prompts for further exploration, and it's really going to be a valuable tool for educators or anybody else that's just really interested in going deeper. Oh, by the way, if you are interested in Deke's work, I actually got, there's a fantastic line of merchandise. I don't know if you guys can see this. Sorry, I'm going to put that in there for you for his project. Just go to the unreliablebestiary.org and score one of these fabulous t-shirts. There's one for, I think, each of your performances, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
And also, oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay.
I'll jump in really quick. Thanks for coming, everyone. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks, Steve. And just as a reminder, next week's Creative POV Artist Talk will be June 19th at 11 a.m. We'll be speaking with Ashley Bigham and Erik Herrmann, the architect duo known as Outpost Office. Our very own Sam Lewis, our Director of Communications here at Ragdale and puppeteer extraordinaire, will be moderating this conversation as they discuss the Ragdale Ring with sports. The 2016 Ragdale Ring winners made up of Molly Hunker and Greg Corso. That'll be really exciting. And also, just as a plug, since Margaret is here, High School Arts Intensive still has space. We've got classes for puppetry, visual art, and creative writing for 9th through 12th graders, so please spread the word. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.